The briefing room at Jagdgeschwader II's airfield near Beauvais held 18 degrees Celsius. Comfortable. Almost warm compared to what waited at 40,000 feet, where the temperature dropped to 40 below zero and frost formed inside oxygen masks. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter stood with his arms crossed, studying the intelligence photographs pinned to the corkboard. The American fighter looked like an engineering joke. Twin booms jutting backward from the wings, a central nacelle suspended between them, like a bathtub with a propeller. Someone had welded two airplanes to a gondola and called it a fighter. Der Gabelschwanzteufel, Hauptmann Ernst Becker said, pointing at the photo. The fork-tailed devil. He was laughing. They were all laughing. Devil? Lieutenant Hans Müller leaned closer to the photograph. It looks like a pregnant cow with ambitions. More laughter. Richter allowed himself a thin smile. He'd encountered 3 P-38 over France in October. 2 had fled. The third had tried to turn with his Focke-Wulf 190 and died for the mistake. Easy kill. Number 23. The Americans call it the Lightning, Becker continued, tapping the intelligence summary. Lockheed P-38J, twin Allison engines, 1,200 horsepower each, 38 feet wingspan, 17,000 pounds loaded. 17,000? Muller shook his head. A foe, 190, weighs 9,000. This thing is a bomber pretending to be a fighter. Becker nodded. The weight creates problems. Turn radius is poor. It cannot follow our fighters through standard evasion maneuvers. Worse, it suffers from compressibility in high-speed dives. The controls lock up. American pilots literally cannot follow us down without losing control authority. Richter had experienced this personally. The P-38 he'd killed in October had tried to follow his dive. The American had pulled up at 12,000 feet, plane shuddering, obviously unable to maintain the descent. Richter had simply continued down, extended the distance, then climbed back to re-engage from advantage. The Lightning pilot had still been recovering when Richter's cannon shells found his left engine. The cockpit. Becker pointed to the central nacelle in the photograph. Completely exposed. No engine in front for protection, like our fighters. A single cannon burst to the nose section, kills the pilot, and destroys all instruments. Construction is also problematic, added Major Wilhelm Hartmann, the squadron's leading ace with 63 kills. He joined them late, listening from the doorway. The twin-boom design creates structural stress points. I've seen them break apart under G-load during violent maneuvers. Hartmann walked to the board, studying the photographs with the professional interest of someone who'd made a career of killing. The Americans designed it as a long-range escort. The twin engines give it range and the ability to fly home on one engine if damaged. But those advantages don't help in close combat. It's too heavy, too slow in turns, too vulnerable. Armament? Richter asked. 4. 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all nose-mounted in the central nacelle. Hartmann shrugged. Concentrated fire, but only if they can point the nose at you. Against a maneuvering target, it's worthless. Our wing-mounted guns give us firing opportunities throughout the turning fight. Mueller laughed again. So the Americans built a fighter that can't turn, can't dive, and presents its pilot in a glass box for us to shoot. Brilliant. Becker shuffled through the intelligence documents. There was one interesting item in the captured materials. An American training document referenced something called... He paused, reading. The Triangle of Death. Some poetic description of their nose armament, apparently. Triangle of Death, Hartmann snorted. Propaganda. The Americans are good at dramatic names. Remember when they called the B-17 the Flying Fortress? We've shot down hundreds. Richter moved closer to the photographs. The P-38's nose was blunt, almost awkward. 4 machine gun barrels protruded in a rectangular pattern. The cannon barrel emerged from the center, slightly below the machine guns. All 5 weapons pointed straight ahead, clustered within perhaps 2 feet of each other. Something about the arrangement caught his attention, but Becker was already moving to the next item. Tactics. Becker pulled down a tactical diagram. The P-38 will attempt to use its speed and altitude advantage. It climbs well and runs well. What it cannot do is fight. Standard engagement protocol. Avoid the head-on pass. No reason to test their forward firepower when we can simply outmaneuver them. Get to their 6 o'clock. Exploit their poor turn radius, and kill them at leisure. They usually run, Mueller added. Smart ones, anyway. Hartman nodded. I've encountered 12 P-38 seconds. Killed 4, watched 8 flee. They know their limitations. When engaged by competent pilots, they extend and disengage. They're not dogfighters. The briefing continued. Weather forecasts. Bomber stream predictions. Fuel allocations. Richter half listened. He was thinking about those 5 gun barrels in the nose, all pointing the same direction. No convergence point to calculate, no spread pattern, just straight ahead. But that only mattered if they could point the nose at you. And a heavy, sluggish fighter with poor turn performance couldn't point its nose at anything except what was directly in front of it. Patrol assignments, Becker announced. Tomorrow, 0800 hours. Anticipated American bomber raid toward the Ruhr Valley. Expect heavy fighter escort, including P-38 seconds. Richter, you'll lead the second swarm. Richter nodded. His 25th kill was waiting somewhere in tomorrow's sky. Perhaps another fork-tailed devil, flown by some American who'd believed his own propaganda about triangles of death. Outside, the December wind rattled the windows. Tomorrow at 40,000 feet, that wind would be worse. 40 below zero. Oxygen masks frosting, fingers numb inside heated gloves. But Richter had flown in worse conditions and still killed. The Americans in their twin-boom jokes would learn the same lesson all the others had learned. German fighters owned the sky over Europe. Experience, skill, and superior aircraft made the difference. Not propaganda. Not dramatic phrases. Not concentrated nose guns on a plane too heavy to aim them effectively. Richter studied the photograph one more time before leaving. The P-38 looked even more ridiculous up close. Twin booms. Exposed cockpit. That awkward central nacelle. He almost pitied whoever was flying them. Almost? 6 months earlier. September 1943. Tommy Morrison's hands were black with grease when his father brought the envelope into the garage. Morrison was under a '39 Ford, replacing a cracked oil pan, when he heard his father's footsteps stop beside the creeper. Tommy. Morrison rolled out. His father held the envelope at arm's length, like it might explode. The return address said Selective Service System. Local Board 17, Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Morrison wiped his hands on a rag that made them dirtier. He already knew what it said. Every man under 26 knew. He opened it standing there in his father's garage on East 185th Street in Cleveland. Oil spots on the concrete floor, the smell of gasoline and metal shavings, the Ford waiting above him with its guts exposed. "Greetings," the letter began. He reported to Fort Hays in Columbus 3 weeks later. Luke Field, Arizona, November 1943. The heat was different from Cleveland. Dry, absolute. 112 degrees on the tarmac, and Morrison stood with 43 other aviation cadets staring at the P-38 Lightning for the first time. It looked wrong. 2 engines, 2 booms. The cockpit suspended between them in a central nacelle that seemed bolted on as an afterthought. No engine in front of the pilot, just glass and aluminum and 40 feet of strange geometry that didn't match any fighter Morrison had seen in newsreels. "Gentlemen," Captain Richard Warren said, walking along the P-38's wing, "you're looking at the most complicated fighter aircraft in the Army Air Force's inventory. 2 engines, 2 propellers, rotating in opposite directions to counter torque, 2 turbochargers, tricycle landing gear, more than 2,000 horsepower available." Someone whistled. "It's also," Warren continued, "the most difficult fighter to master. The P-38 has killed more students during training than enemy action has killed in combat. Compressibility in dives, asymmetric thrust if you lose an engine, Counter-rotating props that will kill you if you don't manage them correctly. Morrison studied the nose section. 5 barrels protruded from the central nacelle. 4 50-caliber machine guns arranged in a rectangular pattern. 1 20mm cannon centered below them. Questions? Warren asked. Lieutenant Robert Phillips raised his hand. Sir, why not just give us P-51 seconds or P-47 seconds? Everything I've heard says those are better fighters. Warren's expression didn't change. The P-38 has advantages. Range. Twin-engine redundancy. And one feature no other fighter in the world possesses. He pointed to the nose. Every weapon on this aircraft fires along the exact same trajectory. No wing-mounted guns. No convergence point to calculate. 4 50 calibers and 1 20mm cannon, all clustered within a 2-foot circle, all firing precisely where your nose points. At 200 yards or 600 yards, the geometry is identical. Morrison stared at those 5 barrels. Something clicked in his mind. A convergence point meant wing-mounted guns only hit the same target at one specific range, closer or farther, and the rounds diverged. You had to judge distance perfectly, predict where the enemy would be, and fire when everything aligned. But if all the guns pointed straight ahead, it doesn't matter where they are, Morrison said quietly. Warren looked at him. Say again, Cadet? Distance doesn't matter, sir. If all the rounds go to the same point, you just aim at the target. 200 yards, 600 yards doesn't matter. You're always shooting at the same spot. Warren nodded slowly. Correct. Which means what? Morrison thought about it. Means you don't have to be perfect, just close. Close enough to point your nose at them, Warren agreed. Which in combat, gentlemen, is the difference between killing and dying. Gunnery practice. December 1943. Morrison flew his 6th training mission, chasing a towed target sleeve at 15,000 feet over the Arizona desert. The P-38 handled like a truck compared to the nimble AT-6 he'd trained in previously. Heavy, ponderous in turns. But when he got the nose pointed at the target sleeve and pressed the trigger, the 4 50 calibers and the 20mm spoke together. Boom chatter, boom chatter. The target sleeve disintegrated. Not just holes. Destroyed. Morrison's radio crackled. Morrison, you just shot the damn cable too. Tow planes bringing back 100 feet of rope and no target. In the ready room afterward, Phillips was complaining. This thing can't turn worth a damn. A 0 would eat us alive. Hell, a 109 would eat us alive. Lieutenant Donald Kemp nodded. I heard they're already transitioning squadrons to P-51 seconds. The Lightning is obsolete before we even get overseas. Morrison said nothing. He was thinking about that target sleeve, about how he'd barely aimed, just pointed the nose in the general direction, and the concentrated firepower had done the rest. About how, in a dogfight, getting your nose pointed at the enemy, even for half a second, might be all you needed. Morrison? Phillips was looking at him. You're quiet. What do you think? Morrison shrugged. I think it shoots where you point it. Everything shoots where you point it. Kemp laughed. Not like this, Morrison said, but he didn't explain further. RAF King's Cliff, England, February 1944. The 20th Fighter Group had been in England since August 1943, flying missions over occupied Europe while Morrison finished training. Now he stood in another briefing room, 7,000 miles from his father's garage in Cleveland, listening to Major Harold Johnson explain tomorrow's mission. Bomber stream targets Frankfurt, 200 B-17 seconds, full load. We escort from the Dutch coast to target and back. Expected enemy fighter opposition, heavy. 4, 190 seconds, me, 109 seconds, possibly me, 110 seconds. Johnson pointed to a map. The Luftwaffe will hit the bombers at altitude, 40,000 feet. Temperature at that altitude is 47 degrees below zero. Your oxygen systems and heating systems must function perfectly, or you'll die before the Germans get a chance to kill you. Morrison sat in the back row. His P-38J was on the flight line, freshly painted, guns loaded, 16 .50 caliber machine guns across 4 barrels, 200 rounds of 20 mm cannon ammunition, all of it pointing straight ahead. First mission, the pilot next to him whispered. Lieutenant James Crawford, from somewhere in Texas. You scared? Morrison thought about it. About the target sleeve disintegrating. About those 5 barrels clustered in the nose. About what Captain Warren had said. Close enough to point your nose at them. No, Morrison said. He wasn't scared. He was ready. The cold at altitude was 47 degrees below zero. Morrison felt it through his heated gloves, through his flight suit, through the fur-lined leather jacket. The P-38's cockpit heating system worked, barely, but at 40,000 feet over the Rhine Valley, nothing could fully stop the cold. His breath frosted inside his oxygen mask. Ice crystals formed at the corners of his goggles. Below, the B-17 formation stretched for miles. 200 bombers in tight defensive boxes heading northeast toward Frankfurt. Morrison flew 3,000 feet above them, weaving gently to maintain position. His P-38 was one of 36 fighters providing escort. The bombers looked small from up here, fragile. Bandits. 11 o'clock high. The radio call came from Captain Warren, leading the formation. Count 16, maybe 20. Look like 190 seconds. Morrison scanned the sky. Found them. Black dots against white clouds, diving toward the bomber stream. Fast. Professional. They'd hit the lead box first, try to break up the formation, create chaos. Lightning blue flight. Engage. Warren's voice stayed calm. Keep them off the bombers. Morrison advanced his throttles. The twin Allison engines responded with a sound he'd grown to know intimately, a deep, mechanical roar that vibrated through the control column. He pushed the nose down, accelerating toward the diving German fighters. The range closed. 3 miles. 2 miles. Morrison saw them clearly now. Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds. Radial engines. Wide wings. Fast and deadly. He'd studied them in training. Excellent turn rate. Heavy armament. Experienced pilots. Everything the instructors said could kill you if you fought them wrong. One few 190 separated from the formation, angling toward Morrison. Head-on pass. The German was diving, probably expecting Morrison to break away, evade, try to get on his 6 o'clock for a tail chase. Every instinct from training said turn. Dogfighting meant getting behind the enemy, staying out of his guns, maneuvering for position. Head-on passes were desperate moves, last resorts, mutual suicide attempts. Morrison didn't turn. He pointed his nose directly at the FW-190 and held it there. The range collapsed. 1 mile, half mile, quarter mile. Morrison could see the German's propeller now, the wing-mounted guns, the pilot's canopy reflecting sunlight. They were closing at a combined speed of 700 miles per hour. In 5 seconds, they'd either collide or one of them would be dead. Morrison's thumb found the trigger on his control column. The few 190's wings lit up. The German was firing. Morrison saw the muzzle flashes, saw tracers reaching toward him, bright lines in the thin air. He felt nothing. No fear. Just the cold and the math and the absolute certainty that his guns pointed exactly where his nose pointed. He squeezed the trigger. 4 .50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon fired simultaneously. The noise was enormous, even through his leather helmet. Boom chatter, boom chatter. The P-38 shuddered. Spent casings ejected from the nose, tumbling past his cockpit in a brass rain. The triangle of death spoke. Morrison saw his rounds hit. The 20mm cannon shell struck the FW-190's engine, cowling dead center, punching through metal like paper. The machine gun rounds followed, stitching across the propeller hub, shredding the spinner, tearing into the firewall behind the engine. The W-190's propeller disintegrated. Pieces spun away, glittering. The German fighter's nose dropped. Not a controlled descent, a fall. The engine was gone, destroyed, suddenly just dead weight pulling the nose down. Morrison flashed past, close enough to see the pilot's helmet, the oxygen mask, the hands frozen on the controls. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter had 3 seconds to understand what happened. Then his Fu-190 entered a flat spin at 40,000 feet, and he died confused. Morrison banked hard left, scanning for threats. His breath came fast now, adrenaline catching up with action. The radio was chaos, voices calling targets, warnings, kills. He ignored it, focusing on the sky around him. Another W-190 appeared below, pulling up from a pass at the bombers. The German pilot saw Morrison and immediately broke hard right, trying to outturn the P-38, force Morrison to follow into a turning dogfight where the lighter W-190 held every advantage. Morrison didn't follow the turn. He watched the FW-190's arc, calculated where it would emerge, and kept his nose pointed at empty air 300 yards ahead of the German's current position. Patient, the same way he'd waited for a stripped bolt to catch thread in his father's garage. Mechanical, precise. The FW-190 completed its turn and flew directly into Morrison's line of fire. Morrison squeezed the trigger. 2-second burst. The triangle spoke again. The German's tail section separated cleanly. Control surfaces gone. The Fu-190 tumbled forward, pilot still in his seat, probably wondering how a plane that couldn't turn had still killed him. No parachute. The pilot never got out. Morrison climbed, regaining altitude. His hands were numb from the cold. He flexed his fingers inside the heated gloves, feeling the stiffness, the way the leather had frozen despite the heating elements. Lightning Blue 3, you got 2. Crawford's voice on the radio, excited. I saw both. Clean kills. Morrison didn't respond. He was watching a Messerschmitt 109 diving away from the bomber formation, smoke trailing from its engine. Someone else's kill, heading down. The Me-109 pilot had the right idea: extend, get distance, survive, to fight another day. But Morrison was faster. The P-38's twin engines gave him power the 109 couldn't match. He pushed the nose down, following. The dive steepened. Morrison felt the controls stiffen as speed built. Compressibility. The instructors had warned about this. Past a certain speed, the air over the control surfaces changed behavior, became thick, resistant. Keep diving, and the controls would lock completely. Morrison fired before that happened. 6-second burst, 600 yards range. The triangle of death reached across empty air and found the fleeing. Me-109. The cannon shell hit first, exploding against the 109's left-wing root. The machine gun rounds followed, walking up the fuselage, shattering the canopy. The Me-109 rolled inverted and kept diving. Morrison pulled out at 15,000 feet, controls heavy, the P-38 shuddering with speed stress. He leveled off, breathing hard, and watched the Me-109 continue down until it disappeared into clouds below. The radio chatter was diminishing. The German fighters were disengaging, diving away, extending distance. The bomber stream continued northeast, formations intact. Morrison counted the B, 17 seconds, looking for missing aircraft. He saw 3 trailing smoke but still flying. Could have been worse. Lightning Blue flight, form up. Warren's voice. Good work. We're staying with the bombers to target. Morrison rejoined the formation. His fuel gauges showed 3/4 remaining. Ammunition counters showed he'd fired perhaps 60 machine gun rounds total, maybe 10 cannon shells. Barely touched his loadout. 3 German fighters destroyed. The flight back to England took 2 hours. Morrison didn't speak on the radio unless required. He flew his position, scanned for threats, monitored his instruments. The cold never stopped. His feet went numb inside his boots. His fingers ached despite the heated gloves. They landed at RAF King's Cliff just before dark. Morrison taxied to his revetment and shut down the engines. The sudden silence was enormous. He sat in the cockpit for 30 seconds, hands still on the controls, before he could make himself move. His crew chief, Sergeant Mike O'Brien from Boston was waiting when Morrison climbed down. O'Brien looked at the guns, at the empty shell casings visible in the breech mechanisms, and grinned. "How many?" Morrison held up 3 fingers. "3?" O'Brien whistled. "First mission and you got 3? They're gonna paint swastikas under your canopy rail, Lieutenant." Morrison nodded. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally draining. He shoved them in his jacket pockets so O'Brien wouldn't see. "Good shooting, sir," O'Brien said. Morrison walked toward the debriefing room. Behind him, O'Brien was already inspecting the P-38, checking for damage, preparing to reload the guns for tomorrow. 3 kills. Morrison's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd killed 3 men today, and all he could think about was how easy it had been. Point the nose. Squeeze the trigger. The triangle of death did the rest. Captain Warren had been right. Close enough was all you needed. 3 days later, WWII 2 briefing room, Beauvais. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter's chair sat empty in the front row. Major Wilhelm Hartmann stood at the intelligence board, studying the mission reports with the concentration of a man reading his own death warrant. 6 aircraft lost over the Rhine Valley on February 12th. 6 pilots dead. Against a bomber escort that intelligence had dismissed as inadequate. "Tell me again," Hartmann said to Lieutenant Hans Müller. From the beginning, Muller's right hand was bandaged. He'd bailed out of his burning Tu-190 at 12,000 feet, deployed his parachute, and landed in a farmer's field near Koblenz. Lucky. The others hadn't been. Richter engaged the P-38 head-on, Müller said. His voice was flat, factual, the tone of a man who'd watched friends die and was trying to understand why. Standard tactics. The Lightning should have broken off or attempted to evade. It didn't. It held position and fired. And, Hartmann prompted, Richter's aircraft disintegrated. One moment he was there, the next his engine was gone, propeller destroyed, the entire nose section collapsed. He went into a spin. Müller paused. It happened in perhaps 2 seconds. Maybe less. Hauptmann Ernst Becker sat at the table, comparing Müller's account with reports from other survivors. Lieutenant Fischer saw the same thing. He said the P-38's nose seemed to explode with fire, and whatever it hit simply came apart. "Concentrated fire," Hartmann said quietly. He walked to the intelligence photographs of the P-38, the same ones they'd laughed at a week ago. He wasn't laughing now. His finger traced the nose section, counting the weapon barrels. 4. 50 caliber openings. 1 20mm cannon bore, all clustered within a circle perhaps 20 inches in diameter. "Gentlemen," Hartmann said, "we've made an error in assessment." The room went quiet. "Our fighters mount guns in the wings." Hartmann pulled down a schematic of the FFU-190, 2 20mm cannon in the wing roots, 2 13mm machine guns in the cowling. The wing guns require convergence calculations. We harmonize them to cross at a specific range, typically 300 meters, closer or farther, and the rounds diverge. The target must be at the precise convergence point for maximum effect. He returned to the P-38 photograph. The Americans have no wing guns. Everything fires from the nose. Same axis as the fuselage. Same trajectory. He let that sink in. There is no convergence point because there is no convergence. The rounds don't cross, they travel parallel. At 100 meters or 600 meters, they hit the same relative position. Müller nodded slowly. Like a fixed cannon platform. Exactly like a cannon platform, Hartmann agreed. Immobile artillery has the same principle. Point it at the target, and every shell follows the same path. The P-38 applies that principle to a fighter aircraft. Lieutenant Werner Adler, 20 years old, with 3 kills, raised his hand. "But, sir, the P-38 still can't turn. We can still outmaneuver it, force it into our kill zone. Can we?" Hartmann looked at him. Fischer tried that. He broke hard right after his pass at the bombers, forcing the P-38 to follow. The Lightning didn't follow. It pointed its nose at the space where Fischer would emerge from his turn and waited. Fischer flew directly into its fire. Becker, added another report to the table. 3 other pilots reported similar encounters. The P-38 seconds don't dogfight. They don't follow maneuvers. They predict where we'll be and fire at empty air. When we arrive at that position, their rounds are already there. The room absorbed this. Through the window, the sound of FW-190 engines warming up for afternoon patrol. Routine sounds, familiar sounds. But the war had changed 3 days ago over the Rhine, and they were only now understanding how. Casualties? Hartmann asked. 6 confirmed destroyed, Becker read from the report. Richter, Fischer, Oberst Kessler, Lieutenant Braun, Feldwebel Schneider, Feldwebel Zimmermann. We also have 2 aircraft damaged and under repair. 1 pilot wounded. Against how many P-38 seconds? Estimated 12 to 15 Lightnings in the engagement zone. We assessed 3 were directly engaged in combat. The others maintained escort position with the bombers. Hartmann did the math silently. 3 P-38 seconds. 6 kills confirmed, 2 damaged. A 2-to-1 kill ratio in favor of the Americans, achieved by an aircraft they dismissed as inferior. New tactical directive, Hartmann said. Effective immediately. Avoid head-on passes with P-38 Lightnings. Engage from the stern quarter only, exploiting their poor turn radius and using our superior maneuverability. If forced into a head-on engagement, break off before entering their firing range. What range is that? Mueller asked. Unknown, Hartmann admitted. American. 50 caliber machine guns are effective beyond 800 meters. The 20 millimeters cannon extends that further. Until we determine the precise effective range of their concentrated fire, assume they can kill at any distance where you can see them. Adler looked skeptical. Sir, with respect, they still have all the fundamental weaknesses. Heavy, slow in turns, compressibility problems. We just need to avoid their one advantage. Their one advantage killed 6 experienced pilots in one engagement, Hartmann said coldly. Richter had 25 kills. Oberst Kessler had 38. These weren't novices. They were among our best, and the P-38's one advantage destroyed them in seconds. The empty chair in the front row seemed to speak louder than Hartmann's words. Radio protocol, Becker announced. When P-38 seconds are spotted, the call is Achtung Gabel. All pilots acknowledge and maintain situational awareness. The fork-tailed devil is no longer a joke. Mueller touched his bandaged hand unconsciously. They'll learn to fear it. They'd better, Hartmann said, because the Americans are learning to use it. He dismissed the briefing. The pilots filed out, heading to their aircraft, their missions, their war. But Richter's chair stayed empty, and 6 fresh graves in the military cemetery outside Beauvais held pilots who'd laughed at photographs of a twin-boom fighter that looked like an engineering mistake. The word was spreading through the Luftwaffe, the Lightning could kill. Not despite its design, but because of it, and the Americans were only getting started. Captain Jack Nolan had spent 5 years calculating risk for Keystone Mutual Insurance in Philadelphia. He'd assessed property damage, actuarial tables, probability of loss. He knew how to read situations, identify advantages, exploit assumptions. At 28, he was older than most fighter pilots, more patient, more calculating. Over Aachen, March 1944, he was about to teach the Luftwaffe a lesson about assumptions. Nolan flew at 35,000 feet, escorting B-17 seconds toward Cologne. His P-38J, nicknamed Dead Certain, had 8 kills painted below the cockpit rail. Today would be 9. He saw the Messerschmitt 109 at 10 o'clock, climbing to intercept. Solo hunter, confident. The 109 pilot probably saw Nolan's P-38 and figured he could exploit the Lightning's poor turn rate, get into a maneuvering fight, kill another overconfident American. Nolan had a different plan. He throttled back his right engine to idle, pulled the mixture control to rich. The engine coughed, sputtered, began trailing white smoke. Not actual damage, just unburned fuel, condensing in the cold air. To anyone watching, it looked like catastrophic engine failure. The P-38 appeared to lose power, nose dropping slightly. Nolan let it descend 200 feet, wings wobbling as if struggling to maintain control. Perfect performance. In Philadelphia, he'd sold policies to theater actors. He'd learned a few things about convincing portrayals. The Mi-109 banked toward him, aggressive, moving in for the easy kill. Nolan counted to 5. Let the German commit. Let him get close enough that he couldn't react in time. The 109 closed to 400 yards. 300. The German pilot was probably smiling, probably already composing the story he'd tell at debriefing about the crippled Lightning he'd finished off. Nolan shoved both throttles to full power. The right engine roared back to life instantly, white smoke vanishing. The P-38 leaped forward, acceleration sudden and violent. Nolan pulled back on the yoke, climbing directly into the Mi-109's approach vector. The German pilot had half a second to realize he'd been deceived. Nolan's thumb found the trigger. The triangle of death spoke at 200 yards range. 4 50 caliber rounds and one 20mm shell converged on the 109's engine cowling. The cannon shell penetrated the supercharger housing, detonating inside. The machine gun rounds shredded the coolant system, severed fuel lines, destroyed the propeller governor. The Mi-109's propeller windmilled uselessly. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The German pilot bailed out immediately. No hesitation. Knowing his plane was dead, Nolan watched the parachute deploy and let him go. The pilot would spend the rest of the war in a POW camp, probably telling his story about the crippled P-38 that wasn't crippled at all. 9 kills. 4 days later, March 18th, over Bonn. Nolan's right engine actually died this time. A Focke-Wulf 190 got lucky with a deflection shot, firing blind into a turn. One 20mm cannon shell hit Nolan's right engine nacelle, penetrating the intercooler section. Coolant pressure dropped to 0. Oil temperature spiked to redline. The engine seized within 30 seconds. Propeller frozen. Standard procedure: feather the dead propeller, disengage from combat, fly home on the remaining engine. The P-38 could do this. It was one of the few fighters that could lose an engine and still make it back to base. The FALV 190 pilot saw the engine failure and moved in to finish the kill. He assumed the fight was over. Damaged aircraft didn't stay in combat. They ran. Nolan didn't run. He advanced the left engine to full military power. The P-38 accelerated on one engine, slower than normal but still moving. The asymmetric thrust tried to yaw the aircraft, right the dead engine, creating drag, the live engine creating power. Nolan compensated with rudder, holding the nose straight. The 190 pilot hesitated, confused. The Lightning should be fleeing. Instead, it was turning toward him. Nolan used the asymmetric thrust deliberately. Full power on the left engine, dead weight on the right. The P-38 slipped sideways through the air, nose pointing one direction while the fuselage drifted another. Unconventional, unpredictable. The Fu-190 pilot tried to lead his target, calculate deflection, but Nolan's flight path made no aerodynamic sense. Nolan fired. The triangle of death found the Fu-190 at 300 yards. The 20mm shell took the German's left wing route, explosive charge detonating inside the fuel tank. The wings separated. The Fu-190 tumbled, pilot still inside, gone before he could react. 10 kills. Nolan flew home on one engine, 75 miles to Raf King's Cliff, maintaining altitude at 15,000 feet, right propeller feathered and useless. His left hand stayed on the throttle, managing power. His right hand held the control column steady, fighting the constant yaw. His legs worked the rudder pedals continuously, compensating for asymmetric thrust. He landed with half his hydraulic fluid gone. Right main gear extended by emergency backup. Sergeant Mike O'Brien and the ground crew stood waiting, staring at the dead engine, the 37mm hole in the right boom, the severed hydraulic lines trailing fluid. "Sir," O'Brien said, walking around the damage. "You flew 70 miles like this?" "Twin engines," Nolan said, climbing down from the cockpit. His legs were cramping from working the rudder pedals for 40 minutes straight. "They give you options." O'Brien looked at the kill markings, then at the damage, then back at Nolan. "You got another one?" "After your engine died?" He assumed I was done. Nolan pulled off his gloves. His hands ached from gripping the controls. Bad assumption. March 25th. Over Koblenz. Nolan flew with both engines operating, but he'd learned something the other P-38 pilots hadn't fully exploited. Asymmetric thrust wasn't just for emergencies. It was a weapon. He engaged a pair of Me 109 seconds, protecting a formation of Ju-88 bombers. The Germans tried standard tactics, scissor maneuvers, attempting to force Nolan to commit to one target while the other attacked from his six. Nolan throttled his right engine back to 70% power, left engine at full. The P-38 drifted right, while the nose pointed left. The lead Me 109 pilot calculated deflection based on the nose position and fired at empty air. Nolan's actual flight path was 3 degrees different from where his nose pointed. He adjusted, lined up, fired. 11 kills. The second 109 dove away. Smart pilot. Survived. By mid-April, Nolan had 15 kills. The ground crew had to start a second row of swastikas below his cockpit. Intelligence officers debriefed him about his tactics, took notes, distributed the information to other squadrons. The Germans think the twin engines are a liability. Nolan explained during one debriefing. Weight, complexity, vulnerability. They're wrong. 2 engines means redundancy, means options, means I can lose half my power plant and still kill them. Major Harold Johnson, squadron commander, studied Nolan's mission reports. You've brought back battle damage on 7 occasions. Severe damage. Most pilots would have disengaged. Insurance assessment, Nolan said. Calculate the risk. 1 engine down isn't fatal. Damaged hydraulics aren't fatal. As long as I can point the nose and squeeze the trigger, I'm still in the fight. And if they damage both engines, Nolan shrugged, then I bail out, but that hasn't happened yet. He flew 73 more missions before it did. Lieutenant William Hayes had taught physics at Little Rock Central High School for 2 years before the war. Newton's laws, vectors, force and counterforce. His students had complained about the relevance. When would they ever use this in real life? Hayes was using it now at 38,000 feet over Mannheim, April 1944, turning physics into a weapon. He'd discovered something during a training flight 3 weeks earlier. The P-38's twin engines didn't just provide redundancy. They created opportunities for differential thrust, reduce power on one engine while increasing it on the other, and the aircraft could perform maneuvers that violated every assumption about conventional flight dynamics. His wingman, Lieutenant Robert Hastings from Nebraska, had watched Hayes practice the technique over the English countryside. "That's not flying," Hastings had said over the radio. "That's controlled, falling with extra steps." "It's vector manipulation," Hayes replied. "Unequal forces creating rotational momentum around a central axis. It looks like your plane's having a stroke, but it worked. And today, Hayes was going to prove it in combat. The Focke-Wulf 190 saw Hayes first. Solo German fighter, probably separated from his squadron, looking for targets of opportunity. The 190 pilot committed immediately, banking hard right to enter a turning engagement where his fighter's superior roll rate would dominate. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine. Force the P-38 into a turn fight, exploit its poor maneuverability, get inside its radius, kill it from the 6 o'clock position. Hayes appeared to comply. He banked right, following the German into what looked like a standard turning dogfight. The 190's turn radius was tighter. It began gaining position, moving from Hayes's 3 o'clock toward his 4, then his 5. Another 10 seconds, and the German would have the kill position. Hayes's left hand moved to the throttle controls. He reduced power on his right engine to 60%. Advanced the left engine to military power, 110%. The asymmetric thrust created immediate effect. The right side of the aircraft produced less forward force, the left side more. Instead of turning in a clean arc, the P-38 began to slide. The nose continued pointing right following the original turn vector, but the fuselage drifted left, sideways momentum. The P-38 moved through space in a direction that had nothing to do with where it was pointing. From the 5190 pilot's perspective, the Lightning was turning away, presenting its 6 o'clock, following predictable geometry. He adjusted his aim, leading the target, preparing to fire. Then, the Lightning slid out of its own turn path. The German pilot had perhaps 1 second to process what he was seeing. The P-38's nose rotated toward him while the aircraft drifted perpendicular to its own heading. Impossible. Aircraft didn't move sideways. They followed their nose direction. Basic aerodynamics. But Hayes wasn't following basic aerodynamics. He was following vector mechanics. The P-38's nose lined up with the W-190 at 250 yards range. Hayes squeezed the trigger. The triangle of death spoke. 4 50 caliber rounds and one 20mm shell converged on the FW-190's cockpit section. The cannon shell penetrated the armored windscreen, detonating inside. The machine gun rounds shredded the canopy framework, destroyed the instrument panel, severed control cables. The W-190 rolled inverted and fell. No fire, no explosion, just sudden aerodynamic failure and a dead pilot. Hayes returned to level flight, balancing his throttles. His hands were steady. He'd just killed a man using applied physics. Hayes, what the hell was that? Hastings' voice crackled over the radio. Differential thrust, Hayes said. Creates a flat turn. The nose rotates independent of the flight path. You're telling me you just slid sideways through the air? Essentially, yes. That's insane. It's mathematics, Hayes corrected. And it works. Back at RAF Kings Cliff, Hayes drew diagrams on the briefing room chalkboard. Thrust vectors, rotational axis, asymmetric force application. The other pilots watched with expressions ranging from fascination to skepticism. Captain Jack Nolan studied the diagrams carefully. You're creating a yaw moment without banking, correct? Hayes said. The German pilots calculate deflection based on our bank angle and apparent turn radius. When we introduce asymmetric thrust, we change the actual flight path while maintaining the visual cues they're using for their firing solution. It looks like one thing but does another, Nolan said. Deception through physics, Hayes agreed. Morrison, now with 12 kills, raised his hand. What's the fuel cost? Running engines at different power settings, that's got to burn more. Approximately 15% increase in consumption during the maneuver, Hayes admitted. But the engagement time is reduced, so net fuel usage is comparable. And you're alive, which matters more than fuel efficiency. Over the next 2 weeks, Hayes used the technique 4 more times. Each kill followed the same pattern. German fighter commits to standard turning engagement. Hayes applies differential thrust. The Lightning slides into firing position. The triangle of death ends the fight. 13 kills total. Then 14, 15, 16. Hayes taught the technique to 5 other pilots in the squadron. Not everyone could master it. The throttle management required precise coordination, maintaining asymmetric power while compensating with rudder and aileron inputs. But those who learned it added another tool to their repertoire. Morrison tried it once, nearly lost control, decided to stick with his head-on passes. Too much thinking, he said. I just want to point and shoot. Nolan mastered it within 3 practice flights. It's like selling insurance, he said. You present one picture while the reality is different. The customer, or in this case, the German pilot, sees what they expect to see until it's too late. Luftwaffe Intelligence Report, April 28, 1944. Recovered post-war from Jagdgeschwader 2 files. New P-38 tactic observed. Aircraft appears to enter standard turn fight, but then deviates from expected flight path. Multiple pilots report Lightning sliding sideways or rotating in place. Traditional deflection shooting, ineffective. Recommend extreme caution when engaging P-38 inches turning combat. Preferred tactic remains disengagement and extension. The report was signed by Major Wilhelm Hartmann, who'd stopped laughing about fork-tailed devils 2 months earlier. By May, the Germans had stopped engaging P-38 seconds in turning fights entirely. They'd learned the Lightning couldn't outturn them in conventional geometry, but the Americans had stopped playing by conventional rules. Hayes flew his 37th mission on May 15th, 19 kills. The physics teacher from Arkansas had become one of the most effective killers in the European theater. He still saw their faces sometimes. The German pilots. Young men, probably students themselves once, learning physics in classrooms, not so different from his own. He'd killed 16 of them using principles of thrust and force and vector mathematics. At night, he dreamed about chalkboards filled with equations that solved for death. But during the day, he flew, and the triangle of death spoke in his voice, translated through throttles and triggers, and the cold mathematics of survival. March became April. The tempo increased. The 20th Fighter Group flew 4 missions per week, then 5, then 6. Bomber streams grew larger. German resistance intensified, and the P-38 pilots refined their craft into something approaching industrial efficiency. The triangle of death spoke constantly over occupied Europe. March 28th. Lieutenant Robert Hastings, farm boy from Nebraska, age 22. Head-on pass against a Messerschmitt 109 over Kassel. Both pilots fired simultaneously at 400 yards. Hastings's rounds hit first 20 millimeters, shell through the 109's propeller hub, machine gun rounds into the engine block. The Germans' rounds hit second 3 20mm shells into Hastings's left engine nacelle. Both fighters exploded within half a second of each other. Hastings bailed out at 18,000 feet. Captured by Wehrmacht infantry, spent the rest of the war in Stalag Luft 3. The German pilot didn't get out. His name was Unteroffizier Peter Adler, 19 years old, 7 kills. The war took them both, though only one survived it. Mutual destruction. But Hastings's sacrifice meant the bomber stream continued unharmed. April 3rd, Lieutenant James Kerrigan, factory worker from Detroit, age 26. Battle damage over Frankfurt severed Kerrigan's elevator control cables. The P-38 could barely maintain level flight, nose heavy, constantly wanting to dive. Kerrigan used trim tabs and throttle management to keep altitude, preparing to disengage and limp home. A Focke-Wulf 190 appeared at his 6 o'clock. The German pilot saw the damaged Lightning struggling and moved in for the easy kill. Kerrigan chopped both throttles. The P-38 decelerated violently. The Evo U-190 overshot. Suddenly ahead instead of behind. Kerrigan shoved the throttles forward, pointed his nearly uncontrollable nose at the German fighter for 3 seconds, and fired. The triangle of death found the FW-190's tail section. The German's rudder disintegrated. He spun into clouds below. Out of control, Kerrigan crash-landed in Belgium. The P-38 cartwheeled across a farmer's field, both booms separating from the central nacelle. Kerrigan walked away with a broken collarbone and a Purple Heart. The ground crew salvaged the guns and scrapped the rest. 1 kill. Delivered from a dying aircraft by a man who'd assembled transmissions on an assembly line in Detroit and understood that broken machines could still function if you knew which parts mattered. April 9th. Lieutenant David Warren, college dropout from Oregon, age 23. 3 kills in 1 mission over Schweinfurt. First, head-on pass. Standard engagement. 20 millimeters through the cockpit. Me-109, pilot dead before his fighter started falling. Second, deflection shot at 500 yards, leading a diving W-190 by 30 feet. The German flew into the cone of fire, right wing separated, tumbled into ground. Third, vertical scissors with an Me-109 that tried to climb with him. Warren used the P-38's superior engine power, stalled at the apex, fell backward, fired inverted at the Germans struggling below. The 109 exploded. Warren landed with 17 rounds of 20 mm remaining, and less than 150 caliber rounds. His crew chief, Sergeant Tony DeMarco from Newark, stood, staring at the empty ammunition bays. "You planning to throw your boots at the next one?" DeMarco asked. Warren just smiled. 14 kills total now. He dropped out of the University of Oregon in 1942 because the war seemed more urgent than his engineering degree. He'd learned more about applied physics in a P-38 cockpit than any classroom had taught him. April 12th. Lieutenant Marcus Cole, ranch hand from Montana, age 25. Zero visibility engagement inside cloud layer at 28,000 feet. Cole heard a German fighter before he saw it, the distinctive sound of a Daimler-Benz engine, somewhere close, invisible in the white void. He turned toward the sound. The clouds broke for 3 seconds. A Messerschmitt 109 appeared 60 yards away, pilot's head turning, seeing Cole at the same instant. Cole fired reflexively. Point-blank range. The triangle of death at minimum distance. The 109 came apart. Engine, wings, tail section, all separating simultaneously. Cole flew through the debris field, fragments hammering his wings. He emerged from the clouds with oil streaks across his canopy and a dent in his left boom from a piece of the German's propeller. The kill was never officially confirmed, no witnesses, no gun camera footage of the actual destruction. But Cole landed with empty shell casings in his breeches and someone else's oil on his windscreen. Luftwaffe records confirmed Unteroffizier Hans Becker, 17 kills, failed to return from that mission. His last radio transmission? "In clouds I hear something." April 18th. Lieutenant Stephen Murphy, postal clerk from Boston, age 24. Long-range shot over Nuremberg. Murphy saw a Focke-Wulf 190 diving away from the bomber formation at 600 yards, extreme range. Low probability hit. Most pilots wouldn't bother. Murphy bothered. He didn't use the 50 calibers, too much dispersion at that distance. Just the 20 mm cannon. Single shots. Leading the target by 50 feet, accounting for gravity drop, wind drift, the Germans' acceleration. Third shot connected. The 20 mm shell hit the W-190's left wing root, explosive charge detonating inside the fuel tank. The wing folded upward, broke off. The German pilot bailed out successfully, parachute deploying, drifting down into his own country. Murphy never saw if he survived. He was already scanning for the next target. Ground crew found 2 empty 20 mm casings. 3 shots fired, 1 kill. Murphy had sorted mail in Boston, learned to be precise, efficient, economical. The same skills applied differently. Statistics. March 15th to April 8th, 1,944. The 20th Fighter Group logged 47 confirmed kills, 31 for 190 seconds, 14 Me, 109 seconds, 2 Me, 110 seconds, 3 P, 38 seconds, lost, 2 pilots killed, 1 captured. Kill ratio, 15-1. Luftwaffe losses in the same period. Western Front, 214 fighters destroyed, 162 pilots killed, 38 wounded, 24 captured. The Germans were running out of experienced pilots. April 20th. New Luftwaffe directive. Jagdgeschwader 2, 26, and 54 received updated tactical instructions. P-38 formations will be engaged using coordinated attacks. Single fighters will not engage alone. Bait and ambush tactics authorized. 1 aircraft exposes itself to draw P-38 seconds into engagement, while additional fighters remain at altitude for diving attack. The Germans were adapting, learning, respecting the threat. Morrison and Nolan countered it immediately. They flew in scissoring pairs, each P-38 covering the other's 6 o'clock, alternating positions every 30 seconds. When Germans tried the bait tactic, the covering P-38 spotted the ambush and called warning. The triangle of death spoke to the ambushers instead. 2 more German fighters destroyed using their own tactic against them. The sound. By late April, German pilots reported hearing the P-38 before seeing it. Not the engines, the guns. The distinctive boom chatter of 4.50 calibers and 120 millimeters firing in concert. The sound carried for miles in the thin air at altitude. Some Germans claimed they could distinguish individual P-38 seconds by their firing rhythm. Morrison fired in 2-second bursts. Nolan in 3. Hayes in 4 controlled pulses. The triangle of death became semi-mythical, an invisible threat that struck from unexpected angles, killed efficiently, and disappeared. German pilots who survived encounters described it in debriefings with something approaching superstitious dread. The Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt were superior aircraft in conventional metrics. Faster, more agile, better armed. But metrics didn't account for concentrated firepower, twin-engine redundancy, and American pilots who'd learned to exploit every advantage while negating every weakness. Diary entry: recovered 1,947. Lieutenant Werner Adler, Jagdgeschwader 2, age 20. Survived the war. April 25th, 1,944. 3 more of us didn't come back today. The Americans and their fork-tailed fighters are no longer funny. We call them devils now, and we mean it. When you hear that sound, the boom and chatter together, you know someone is about to die. Usually us. The joke has become our nightmare. I don't laugh anymore. None of us do. The war continued. The kills accumulated, and the triangle of death spoke its language across the European sky, mechanical and precise and absolutely unforgiving. May 7th, 1,944, 39,000 feet over Frankfurt. Captain Jack Nolan had 24 kills painted below his cockpit. One more, and he'd match the top P-38 ace in the European theater. 2 more, and he'd exceed it. The Messerschmitt 109 that appeared at his 2 o'clock had different plans. Nolan saw it immediately. The way it moved told him everything. No hesitation, no wasted motion, pure economy of action. The 109 didn't dive aggressively or bank sharply. It simply adjusted its vector to intercept, professional and precise. Expert pilot, possibly the best Nolan had encountered. Lightning led, Bandit 2 o'clock high. Nolan radioed to his wingman, Lieutenant Hayes, "I'm engaging. Stay with the bombers." "Copy. Watch yourself." Nolan banked right, climbing to meet the 109. The German pilot mirrored the move, maintaining energy advantage. They circled each other at 400 yards distance, 2 predators evaluating, calculating. The 109 moved first. It rolled inverted and pulled through, diving beneath Nolan's P-38, then snap-rolled upright and climbed again. Textbook deflection. The German was testing Nolan's reaction time, his situational awareness, his ability to track a rapidly maneuvering target. Nolan didn't chase. He'd learned that lesson. Instead, he maintained altitude, kept his energy, watched the 109 complete its maneuver, and return to neutral position. The German tried again. Hard bank left, then immediate reversal right, trying to force Nolan to commit to a turn direction, over bank, bleed speed. The P-38's poor roll rate meant that once Nolan committed to a turn, changing direction cost precious seconds. Nolan didn't commit. He flew straight, nose pointed at the space between the Germans' maneuvers. The 109 pilot was good. Better than good. He exploited every advantage: lighter weight, superior roll rate, tighter turn radius. He stayed outside Nolan's effective firing range while maneuvering into position for his own shot. Then he made his first real attack. The 109 came out of a climbing turn with perfect deflection, nose pointed 20 degrees ahead of Nolan's flight path. 30mm cannon and machine guns fired together. Tracers reached across the sky, bright lines converging on where Nolan would be in half a second. Nolan pushed the nose down hard, full dive. The P-38 accelerated toward the ground, speed building rapidly, 400 miles per hour, 450, 500. The 109 followed. Nolan felt the controls begin to stiffen. Compressibility. The air over his elevators was changing behavior, becoming thick and resistant. Past 520 miles per hour, the P-38's controls would lock completely. He'd be unable to pull out, unable to recover, just a ballistic object falling toward Earth. The German knew this. He was forcing Nolan into the P-38's fatal flaw, exploiting the one weakness that killed more Lightning pilots than enemy fire. Nolan watched his airspeed indicator climb past 510. The stick felt like it was embedded in concrete. His hands ached from pulling. The nose stayed pointed down, angle steepening, 515 miles per hour. The ground was visible now through the clouds, green fields, villages, rivers, coming up fast. 518. Nolan stopped pulling. Instead, he trimmed the elevator's nose up using the electric trim wheel. Slow adjustment. The trim tabs could still move even when the primary control surfaces couldn't. Gradually, carefully, he transferred the pulling force from the locked elevators to the smaller trim surfaces. The nose began to rise. Incrementally, the P-38's dive angle decreased from 70 degrees to 65, to 60, to 55. At 12,000 feet, traveling 523 miles per hour, Nolan pulled out. The G-forces pressed him into his seat. His vision grayed at the edges. The P-38 groaned. Airframe stressed, but held together. He was level at 8,000 feet, speed bleeding off, controls returning to normal. The Mi-109 was still above him, diving. The German pilot had followed Nolan through the compressibility zone. Fatal mistake. The 109 suffered from the same high-speed control problems, but with one critical difference: the Messerschmitt was lighter, less stable. At extreme speeds, it became uncontrollable faster. Nolan watched the 109 struggling to pull out. The German was fighting his controls, trying to recover, but at 540 miles per hour, the 109's elevators were completely locked. The fighter continued diving. Angle too steep. Recovery impossible. But the German was good. Exceptionally good. He rolled the aircraft, instead used his ailerons, which still functioned, to rotate the 109 90 degrees. Then he pulled back on the stick, using what little elevator authority remained. The maneuver converted some vertical speed into horizontal, bleeding energy, reducing the dive angle by 10 degrees. Just enough. The 109 pulled out at 4,000 feet. Nolan's estimation of his opponent increased further. That recovery was brilliant, improvised, desperate, and effective. Now they were both low, both slow, both recovering from extreme maneuvers. Reset, equal footing. Except Nolan had two engines producing 2,400 horsepower combined. The German had one engine producing 1,500. Nolan shoved both throttles to war. Emergency power, 120%. Limits disregarded. The twin Allison engines screamed. The P-38 accelerated, climbing at 4,500 feet per minute. The 109 tried to follow. Its Daimler-Benz engine was excellent, one of the best in the war, but it couldn't match the raw power advantage of two engines operating beyond their design specifications. Nolan climbed vertical, straight up. The P-38's nose pointed at the sky, speed bleeding off as gravity fought momentum. At 15,000 feet, his airspeed dropped below 150 miles per hour. At 18,120. At 20,000 feet, 80 miles per hour. The P-38 was nearly stalled, hanging on its propellers, moments from falling backward. The Mi-109 was below him, still climbing, still trying to follow, but 500 feet lower and losing position. At the apex of his climb, Nolan kicked full right rudder. The P-38 snap-rolled, nose falling through the horizon, rotating 180 degrees. The stall turn, a maneuver that required precise timing, massive engine power, and complete trust in your aircraft. Nolan's nose came down, pointing directly at the climbing Mi-109. The German pilot was looking up at him, probably realizing what had happened, probably understanding in that final second that he'd been outmaneuvered by an aircraft everyone said couldn't maneuver. Vertical shot, straight down, range 250 feet. Nolan fired. The triangle of death spoke along a purely vertical axis. 4 50 caliber rounds and one 20mm shell fell like artillery, guided by gravity and aimed by geometry. The 109 had nowhere to go. It was climbing, slow, committed to a flight path it couldn't change quickly enough. The rounds hit from directly above, through the engine cowling, through the cockpit canopy, through the fuselage spine. The Messerschmitt broke apart, wings separated, the engine tore free. The pilot never got out. Nolan recovered from his dive, leveled off at 10,000 feet, hands shaking from adrenaline. Lightning led. Confirm kill? Hayes's voice on the radio. Confirmed, Nolan said. His voice was steady despite his hands. 20. Back at RAF Kings Cliff, intelligence officers debriefed Nolan for 90 minutes. They wanted every detail. The German pilot's tactics, the compressibility dive, the vertical engagement, everything. You said he was better than you, Major Harold Johnson prompted. He was, Nolan confirmed. Better stick skills, better tactical sense, better situational awareness. In a 1-versus-1 maneuvering fight, he would have killed me. But he didn't. No, sir. Nolan looked at his hands, still slightly trembling. He was better than me in every way except one. The aircraft. The aircraft, Nolan agreed. He had skill. I had 2 engines and concentrated firepower. When it mattered, that was enough. Post-war research identified the German pilot as Major Karl Steiner, Jagdgeschwader 54, 38 kills, 13 years of military service, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced and capable fighter pilots. He'd survived the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, and 2 years over Germany. The triangle of death killed him anyway. By June 15th, Nolan had 25 kills. The paperwork for the Medal of Honor was already moving through channels. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia had become the top-scoring P-38 pilot in the European theater. He flew 43 more missions before September. He never encountered another pilot as skilled as Major Steiner. He often wondered if that made the killing easier or harder. June 8th, 1944, 2 days after D-Day. The coast of Normandy was burning. Tommy Morrison flew at 8,000 feet, watching the invasion beaches spread below like a vast industrial operation. Ships, landing craft, smoke, explosions. The entire coastline transformed into a mechanized nightmare of war. His 47th mission. 19 kills painted below his cockpit rail. The mechanic from Cleveland had become efficient at his work. But today's work was different. Lightning blue flight, ground targets. Major Johnson's voice crackled through the radio. German armor concentration at grid reference Charlie 7. Strafe and suppress. Watch for flak. Ground attack. Morrison hated ground attack. At 40,000 feet, you saw enemies coming. You had time, space, options. Down low, the Earth reached up to kill you with invisible shells, and you couldn't see them until they'd already fired. He descended with his flight, 4 P-38 seconds in loose formation. The target appeared. 6 Panzer IV tanks positioned behind hedgerows, firing at advancing American infantry, 200 yards distant. Morrison rolled inverted and pulled through, diving toward the tanks. The triangle of death wasn't optimized for ground attack. The nose-mounted weapons meant you had to point the entire aircraft at the target, but concentrated fire still worked. Point and shoot. He fired at 2,000 feet. 4 50 calibers and one 20mm raking across the lead tank. Rounds sparked off armor, punched through engine compartments, found ammunition storage. The tank exploded, turret lifting 10 feet before crashing back down. Morrison pulled up hard, G-forces pressing him into his seat. Flak erupted around him, black puffs of 88mm shells, dozens of them, filling the sky with shrapnel and explosive force. Something hammered his right boom. Not fatal. He kept climbing. Behind him, Lieutenant Hayes destroyed a second tank. The German armor was withdrawing, backing into tree cover. Good hits, Johnson called. Reform at Angels 10. We're Bandits, 4 o'clock low. Morrison snapped his head right. 3 Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds climbing fast from treetop level. They'd been waiting, hiding below the flak zone, letting the P-38 seconds commit to ground attack before revealing themselves. Ambush. Morrison rolled right, diving toward the threat. His wingman, Lieutenant Robert Hastings, the farm boy from Nebraska who'd been repatriated in a prisoner exchange last month, followed. The Germans split, 2 breaking left, 1 continuing straight. Morrison took the single 190 head-on pass. Standard geometry. The German fired first at 600 yards too early, rounds falling short. Morrison waited. 400 yards, 300. He fired. The triangle of death found the few 190's engine. The 20mm shell detonated inside the supercharger housing. The fighter nosed down, trailing black smoke, pilot bailing out immediately. 1. Morrison banked hard, looking for the other 2 190 seconds, found them both on Hastings's tail, scissoring to prevent counterattack. Hastings was good, keeping them in front through violent maneuvers, but 2-on-1 was bad geometry. Morrison climbed, positioned, dove onto the trailing 190. The German never saw him. Morrison fired from 400 yards, slightly high angle. The rounds walked down the 190's fuselage, from tail to cockpit. The fighter broke apart. 2. The third, 190, abandoned Hastings and reversed hard, coming at Morrison with obvious rage. Experienced pilot, fast reactions, and Morrison was slow, bleeding energy from his diving attack. They merged at 200 yards, both firing. Morrison felt the hits before he heard them. Heavy thuds through the airframe. His left engine temperature spiked instantly. Oil pressure dropped to 0. He looked left. The engine nacelle was torn open, cowling shredded, flames visible inside. Engine fire. Morrison pulled the left engine fire suppression handle. Nothing happened. The fire grew, spreading aft along the boom toward the wing fuel tank. He could see the flames through his side window, orange and hungry. Morrison's hit, Hastings's voice. I'm on him. I'm on him. Morrison heard Hastings's guns firing. The third few 190 broke off, diving away, Hastings pursuing. Morrison's left wing fuel tank caught fire. Flames spread across the leading edge, consuming metal and fabric. He had maybe 10 seconds before the wing separated. Morrison reached for the canopy release. Pulled hard. The canopy jettisoned, torn away by the slipstream. Cold air rushed in. They were only at 6,000 feet. Temperature a manageable 50 degrees. But the wind was violent. He unstrapped his harness, stood up in the cockpit. The P-38 was losing altitude, falling in a gentle left turn. Left wing completely engulfed now. Morrison jumped. The fall was immediate and disorienting. Sky and ground traded places rapidly. He pulled the ripcord. The parachute deployed with a violent jerk, straps digging into his shoulders. Sudden silence. Just wind and the distant sound of engines. Below, his P-38 spiraled down and impacted in a French field, exploding in a ball of orange flame. 26 months of flying. 47 missions. 19 kills. Reduced to burning wreckage in seconds. Morrison drifted down. He could see Wehrmacht soldiers running toward his projected landing point. Regular army, gray uniforms. Not SS. That was something. He landed hard in a wheat field, stumbled, collapsed the parachute, his ankle twisted but held. He stood up, hands raised, as 6 German soldiers surrounded him with rifles. A German sergeant approached, middle-aged, professional. He checked Morrison for weapons, found none, and gestured toward a road where a truck waited. "For you, the war is over," the sergeant said in accented English. Morrison nodded. He looked up one last time, saw Hastings's P-38 circling overhead, watching. Then Hastings turned west, back toward England, back to the war. Stalag Luft, Northern Germany. Morrison spent the next 11 months in a prisoner of war camp. 14 hours of boredom, 2 hours of hunger, 8 hours of cold sleep. He played cards, Reed censored letters from home, waited. Betty's letters stopped coming in October. The Red Cross informed him she'd married a factory supervisor in Cleveland. Morrison folded the notification letter and put it in his footlocker and never spoke of it. The Russians liberated the camp in May 1945. Morrison returned to England, then America, then Cleveland. His father's garage was still there on East 185th Street. The '39 Ford he'd been fixing when his draft notice arrived was long gone. He went back to fixing cars. At night, sometimes he'd wake up reaching for controls that weren't there, hearing the boom chatter of guns that existed only in memory. 19 kills, 19 men dead because he'd pointed his nose at them and squeezed a trigger. The triangle of death had spoken in his voice for 47 missions. Now it was silent, and Tommy Morrison went back to being a mechanic, and he never flew again. His last thought before the German soldiers took him standing in that wheat field in Normandy. Parachute collapsed around him. His burning P-38 visible in the distance had been simple and precise. I only got to 19. Not fear, not relief, just the accountant's instinct of a man who'd been keeping score in a game where the numbers meant everything and nothing simultaneously. The war continued without him. The triangle of death found other voices. July 1944. Lieutenant William Hayes had 41 kills painted below his cockpit rail. He couldn't sleep. Every night at RAF King's Cliff, Hayes lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling of the Nissen Hut barracks, counting rivets in the corrugated metal, listening to other pilots snore. When he closed his eyes, he saw faces. 17 faces, maybe 18. The German pilot who'd bailed out over Reims 3 weeks ago. Parachute deploying successfully, drifting down alive. Hayes had circled once standard procedure, confirmed the kill, and seen the boy's face clearly. Because he was a boy. 17 years old, maybe 18 at most. Blonde hair, terror in his eyes. Looking up at Hayes's P-38, like it was God's judgment manifested in aluminum and gunfire. Hayes had killed him 10 seconds earlier. Shot his Messerschmitt 109 to pieces with the triangle of death. The boy had survived only because he'd bailed out fast enough. But Hayes kept seeing his face. That morning, the face from 2 months ago over Stuttgart, the one from April above the Rhine whose parachute had failed to open completely, who'd fallen faster than he should have, limbs flailing. Hayes had watched until impact. 41 kills meant 41 faces, and Hayes was starting to remember all of them. Lieutenant Hayes, report to the flight surgeon. Captain Richard Warren found Hayes in the armament shop, watching Sergeant DeMarco load 20mm ammunition into his P-38's cannon magazine. Hayes had been there for 2 hours, just watching, not speaking. Sir, flight surgeon. Now, that's an order. Major David Klein's office smelled like antiseptic and coffee. Klein was 43, too old for combat flying, experienced enough to recognize what he was seeing in Hayes's eyes. How many hours of sleep last night, Lieutenant? Adequate, sir. That's not an answer. Hayes shrugged. 2 hours, maybe 3. And the night before? Similar. Klein made a note. You've volunteered for every mission this month. 14 missions in 21 days. That's above the operational tempo requirement. We need pilots, sir. I'm available. You're exhausted. I'm effective. Hayes's voice remained flat. 41 kills. 0 friendly fire incidents. Mission success rate, 100%. My aircraft commander rates my performance as exemplary. Your ground crew says you don't talk anymore. Hayes said nothing. Klein leaned back in his chair. I'm grounding you for 1 week. Medical evaluation. Rest. You'll... Sir? I respectfully request. It's not a request, Lieutenant. You're grounded. Hayes spent 3 days in his bunk. Didn't read. Didn't write letters. Didn't attend the briefings or socialize in the officers' club. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting. 41 men. 41 fathers, sons, brothers. 41 people who'd woken up one morning, eaten breakfast, climbed into their fighters, and died because William Hayes, physics teacher from Little Rock, Arkansas, had pointed 5 guns at them and squeezed a trigger. The mathematics were clean. Force vectors, trajectory calculations, ballistic coefficients. The physics Hayes had taught to bored teenagers in Little Rock Central High School translated perfectly to killing. The consequences were less clean. On the 4th day, Hayes requested a meeting with Klein. Spoke calmly, explained that the rest had helped, that he felt better, that he was ready to return to duty, that the squadron needed experienced pilots, and grounding him weakened operational effectiveness. Klein studied him for a long time. "You're lying." "Yes, sir." "But you're going to keep lying until I clear you." "Yes, sir." Klein signed the clearance form. "If you get yourself killed because you're not sleeping, I'm putting it in your personnel file." "Understood, sir." July 23rd. Mission over Munich. Hayes flew with mechanical precision. No wasted motion. No unnecessary communication. He'd become a machine that flew a machine that killed other machines with men inside them. First kill. 190 at 28,000 feet. Head-on pass. 2-second burst. The German's engine disintegrated. The fighter tumbled. Hayes didn't watch it fall. Second kill. Me-109, attempting to dive away. Hayes followed. Fired from 400 yards. Hit the tail section. The 109 lost control authority. Spun into clouds. Hayes pulled up without confirming the crash. Third kill. Another 109, this one flown by someone good. They merged 3 times, each pilot trying to gain advantage. Finally, Hayes used his differential thrust technique, throttled back the right engine, slid sideways, lined up the shot. The triangle of death spoke. The 109 exploded. 44 kills total. Hayes felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not fear. Not even the residual adrenaline that used to make his hands shake after combat. Just emptiness. He landed, taxied to his revetment, shut down the engines. Sergeant DeMarco approached with the ground crew, ready to inspect for damage and reload ammunition. 3 more, Lieutenant? DeMarco smiled. "You're making my job easier. I can't paint them fast enough." Hayes climbed down from the cockpit, walked past DeMarco without responding, headed toward the debriefing room. DeMarco watched him go, smile fading. He turned to his assistant. "How long since you heard him say anything that wasn't mission essential?" 2 weeks, Sarge, maybe 3. That night, Hayes wrote a letter to his fiancée, Sarah, in Little Rock. "Dear Sarah, I'm well. The missions continue. I can't tell you where or when, but I'm safe, and the work is important. I miss teaching. I miss the classroom. I miss explaining Newton's laws to students who didn't care but at least were alive to not care." He stopped writing, stared at the page. What could he possibly tell her? That he'd become extraordinarily efficient at killing? That physics translated beautifully to murder? That he'd killed 44 men and couldn't remember why it had ever seemed necessary? He crumpled the letter and started again. "Dear Sarah, I'm fine. I think about you constantly. The war will be over soon and I'll come home. Love, William." 3 sentences, all lies. He sealed the envelope before he could reconsider. August 2nd. The Officers' Club. Lieutenant Robert Hastings, recently returned from his brief POW stint, sat down next to Hayes. Hastings had been shot down, repatriated in a prisoner exchange, and returned to flight status. He was one of the few people who still tried to talk to Hayes. "You okay?" Hastings asked. Hayes was drinking coffee. Just coffee. He'd stopped drinking alcohol. It made the dreams worse. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "I'm the best killer in the squadron," Hayes said. His voice was completely flat. 44 confirmed kills. 0 losses on missions I've led. Mission effectiveness rating exceeds 97%. By every metric that matters, I'm fine. Hastings stared at him. "Jesus, Hayes. What? You sound like you're reading a performance report. Isn't that what we are?" Hayes looked at him. "Performance metrics. Kill ratios. Mission success rates. I perform exceptionally. Therefore, I'm fine." Hastings didn't have an answer for that. He finished his drink and left. Hayes sat alone in the officers' club, staring at his hands. They were steady, completely steady. No tremors, no shaking. Just the hands of a 24-year-old physics teacher who'd killed 44 men and felt nothing about it except a distant, clinical observation that the number would probably increase tomorrow. He counted on his fingers. 44 men, 44 sons, probably 30 fathers, maybe 20 brothers, 1,400 students he'd never teach, 2,000 lessons he'd never give, incalculable moments of life erased because he'd pointed his nose at them and the triangle of death had spoken. The mathematics were elegant. The cost was incalculable. Hayes went back to his bunk, lay down, stared at the ceiling, counted rivets until his eyes burned, closed them, saw 17-year-old faces falling through the sky, opened them again. The war continued. The missions continued. William Hayes continued flying and killing with mechanical efficiency. The nightmares continued too. And somewhere in Arkansas, Sarah received a 3-sentence letter from a man who was already becoming a ghost. September 12th, 1944, King's Cliff. Lieutenant James Rowland from Wisconsin arrived with orders, assigning him to the 20th Fighter Group, 22 years old. Fresh from training, 60 hours in P-38 seconds, 0 combat experience. He was Tommy Morrison's replacement. Captain Jack Nolan watched Rowland walk across the flight line, duffel bag over his shoulder, looking at the battle-worn P-38 seconds with expressions cycling between excitement and terror. Nolan had seen that look before. On Morrison's face, 2 years ago. On his own face, once. Most of them survived long enough to lose the expression. Some didn't. Captain Nolan, Rowland saluted. Lieutenant Rowland, reporting for duty, sir. Nolan returned the salute. Drop your gear in Hut 7. Briefing at 0600 tomorrow. You're flying my wing. Yes, sir. Rowland hesitated. Sir, I heard about Lieutenant Morrison. I'm sorry. Nolan looked at him. Morrison had been shot down in June. Captured. Last anyone knew, he was in a POW camp somewhere in Germany, alive, waiting for the war to end. Morrison's fine, Nolan said. He's sitting out the rest of the war playing cards in a prison camp. You should be so lucky. Rowland nodded, relieved. He walked toward the barracks. Nolan watched him go. 43 kills painted below his own cockpit, recommended for the Medal of Honor, top-scoring P-38 pilot in the European theater, and now responsible for keeping a 22-year-old from Wisconsin alive long enough to learn how to fight. The mathematics of war were getting worse. September 14th, 1944, Munich. Nolan led a flight of 4 P-38 seconds himself, Hayes, Hastings, and Rowland. Bomber escort. Standard mission. The B-17 seconds droned northeast toward their target, 200 heavy bombers in defensive boxes, and the P-38 seconds weaved above them at 38,000 feet. Bandits, 12 o'clock high, Hayes called. His voice was flat, mechanical. He'd stopped inflecting emotion months ago. Count 8. Fast movers. Nolan scanned the sky. Found them. But something was wrong. They were too fast. Way too fast. The contrails were different. Single white lines, instead of the double contrails from reciprocating engines. Those aren't 190 seconds, Hastings said. What are those? Nolan's blood went cold. He'd read the intelligence reports, heard the rumors. Messerschmitt. Me-262. Jet fighter. 540 miles per hour. 430 millimeters cannon. The future of aerial combat, and the death of everything Nolan had learned. Jets, Nolan said. Stay tight. Watch your 6. The Me-262 seconds dove through the P-38 formation like bullets through paper. 1 second, they were specks at high altitude. The next, they were past, already 2 miles away and climbing again. Nolan barely had time to track them. One B-17 exploded, then another. The jet's 30 millimeters cannon shells were devastating. Single hits could tear bombers apart. The P-38 seconds were supposed to protect the bombers. But how do you intercept something traveling 100 miles per hour faster than you? Engaging. Hastings dove after a jet that had overshot its attack run. Negative. Break off, Nolan shouted. You can't catch them. But Hastings was already committed. The Me-262 pilot saw him coming, simply advanced his throttles, and accelerated away. Hastings fell behind. Outpaced. Irrelevant. The jets came back for a second pass. This time they targeted the P, 38 seconds. Nolan saw one jet line up on Roland. The kid was maintaining formation, doing everything right, but nothing prepared you for an enemy approaching at closing speeds above 700 miles per hour. Roland, brake right! Nolan screamed into the radio. Roland broke. Too late. The Me-262's 30mm cannons fired. 4 guns, each firing 550 rounds per minute, each shell carrying 330 grams of high explosive. The burst lasted 1 second. 12 shells. Roland's P-38 disintegrated. Not damaged. Not on fire. Disintegrated. The central nacelle exploded. Both booms separated. Wings folded upward from the impact force. Pieces tumbled through the air. Engines, cockpit section, tail assemblies, all separating in a debris cloud that spread across a quarter-mile of sky. No parachute. Roland never got out. Probably died in the first millisecond when a 30mm shell detonated in his cockpit. He'd survived exactly 1 combat mission, 97 minutes from takeoff to death. Nolan reversed hard, trying to line up a shot on the Me-262 that had killed Roland. The jet was already extending, speed increasing, pulling away. But Nolan had learned deflection shooting from 3 years of combat. He knew how to lead a fast-moving target. He knew how to calculate the impossible. He fired at 600 yards, full deflection, aiming at empty air 30 feet ahead of the jet, letting it fly into his rounds. The triangle of death spoke one last time in Nolan's voice. 1 20mm shell hit the Me-262's right engine nacelle. Just one. The explosive charge detonated inside the jet turbine. The engine disintegrated. The Me-262 yawed violently right, spinning, the pilot fighting for control. It fell, trailing smoke, damaged but not destroyed. 1 hit out of a 4-second burst. Against a target moving 540 miles per hour. At 600 yards range. It was the best shot Nolan had ever made. It didn't matter. Another Me-262 appeared behind Nolan. He never saw it. Hayes screamed a warning, but there wasn't time. The jet's 30mm cannons fired. 3 shells hit Nolan's right engine. The boom exploded, metal fragments shredding the wing root, fuel lines rupturing. Fire spread instantly. The right wing was a torch. I'm hit. Nolan's voice was controlled. Professional. Right engine gone, wing fire. I'm going down. He didn't bail out. Not at 38,000 feet with enemy jets circling. He dove, trading altitude for speed, getting low where maybe he could control the crash. Hayes and Hastings stayed with him as long as they could, but the P-38 was falling too fast. Nolan's voice came over the radio, calm, precise, calling out his altitude. 20,000, 15,000. Fire spreading. 10,000. I see a field. 5,000. Going in. Then silence. Nolan tried to land in a farmer's field, 6 miles behind Allied lines. The ground forces had advanced far enough that he might have survived, might have walked back, might have lived to fly again, but the field had trees at the eastern edge. Tall poplars, 30 feet high. Nolan didn't see them through the smoke until too late. The P-38 hit the trees at 120 miles per hour. The left boom caught first, ripping off. The aircraft cartwheeled, right wing disintegrating. The central nacelle tumbled forward, cockpit leading, and impacted the ground nose first. American troops found him 40 minutes later. Captain Jack Nolan, age 28, insurance salesman from Philadelphia, was still strapped in his seat. The impact had killed him instantly. Blunt force trauma, neck broken, chest crushed by the instrument panel. 43 kills, painted on the wreckage. They buried him with full military honors at the American Cemetery in Normandy. The Medal of Honor arrived 3 months later, awarded posthumously. His family received it in Philadelphia, along with a folded flag and a letter from Major Harold Johnson, explaining that Captain Nolan had been the finest pilot Johnson had ever commanded. September 18th, 1944. The telegram arrived at Raf King's Cliff via Red Cross channels. Tommy Morrison, previously listed as POW, status updated to killed in action. The details came later. Morrison had bailed out over Munich in June. The Wehrmacht had captured him initially regular army, professional soldiers. They'd processed him correctly, sent him to a processing station, followed the Geneva Convention protocols. The Hitler Youth had found him being transferred between facilities. They'd beaten him to death with rifle butts and clubs on a roadside outside Augsburg. 16-year-old boys, radicalized by propaganda, seeing an American pilot and deciding justice needed to be immediate and violent. Morrison's body had been left in a ditch. French POWs on a work detail found it 3 days later and buried it in an unmarked grave. The grave was identified by his dog tags after the war ended. The mechanic from Cleveland. 19 kills. Dead at 24. Murdered after he'd already surrendered. Killed, not by combat, but by brutality. 2 funerals in 1 week. September 20th, 1944. Memorial service for Captain Nolan and Lieutenant Morrison. Chaplain Davis conducted it in the base chapel. 60 pilots attended. Empty chairs at the front represented the dead. Lieutenant William Hayes didn't attend. He was in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, counting. 47 kills now. 47 men dead by his hand. Morrison dead. Nolan dead. Rowland dead after 1 mission. The jets had arrived, faster than P-38 seconds, armed with cannons that could destroy bombers with single bursts, flown by desperate Germans defending their homeland. The triangle of death was becoming obsolete. The men who'd mastered it were dying. And Hayes lay in his bunk, hands steady, mind empty, counting rivets in the ceiling, and wondering if he'd make it to 50 kills before the jets killed him too. Outside, they were painting over Nolan's 43 swastikas, preparing the aircraft for a new pilot who'd inherit a blood-stained legacy and probably die before learning Nolan's tricks. The war continued. The mathematics continued. The killing continued. Until it didn't. December 1944. Battle of the Bulge. The weather over Belgium was 41 degrees below zero at altitude, and getting worse. Snowstorms reduced visibility to 0. Ice formed on wings, in engine intakes, across windscreens. Aircraft iced over and fell from the sky without enemy action. The cold itself became a weapon. Lieutenant William Hayes flew through it anyway. His 45th mission in December alone. The 20th Fighter Group was flying constantly ground support for desperate American forces surrounded at Bastogne, interdiction missions against German supply columns, escort for any bombers insane enough to fly in these conditions. Hayes had 41 kills. 4 more German fighters would fall before the month ended. The numbers kept climbing. Hayes stopped caring what they meant. December 18th. Over the Ardennes forest. White out conditions. Hayes flew through clouds so thick he couldn't see his own wingtips. Ice accumulated on his P-38's leading edges, adding weight, disrupting airflow. The engines labored. The controls felt sluggish. His radio crackled. Lightning blue flight, bandits reported at Angels 15, grid Charlie 4. Proceed and engage. Hayes turned toward the coordinates. Through a break in the clouds, he saw 3 Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds strafing American positions below. They were low, vulnerable, focused on ground targets. Hayes dove. The first 190 pilot never saw him. Hayes emerged from clouds at 300 yards range, fired a 2-second burst. The triangle of death found the German's engine. The fighter nosed into the ground at 200 miles per hour, 42. The second pilot saw Hayes and tried to run. climbed into the cloud layer. Hayes followed him through the white void, flying on instruments, tracking by sound and instinct. They broke clear at 18,000 feet. The German banked hard right. Hayes used his differential thrust technique, throttled back, slid sideways, lined up, fired. The 190 exploded. 43. The third pilot was good, experienced. He didn't run or fight conventionally. He flew into the weather, used the clouds as cover, tried to lose Hayes in the snowstorm. But Hayes had been flying in this weather for weeks. He knew how to track contrails, how to predict flight paths from minimal visual cues. He followed the German through 3 cloud layers, emerged behind him at 9,000 feet, fired from 400 yards. The 190's tail separated. The pilot bailed out, parachute deploying into the snowstorm. Hayes watched him drift down into German-held territory. Probably survived. Probably went home. 44. December 22nd. Escort mission over Bonn. A Messerschmitt 109 tried to intercept the bomber formation. Hayes engaged it in clouds at 23,000 feet. 0 visibility. Both pilots flying blind, tracking each other by engine sound and brief glimpses through breaks in the weather. They merged, head-on. Hayes fired first. The triangle of death spoke in white darkness. The 109 fell spinning. 45. Hayes felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not fear. Not even the mechanical acknowledgement he used to feel. Just emptiness. The number increased. The war continued. The meaning had evaporated somewhere between kill 30 and 45, and Hayes couldn't remember when or why it had ever mattered. December 26th. RAF Kings Cliff. Lieutenant Tommy Baker, 20 years old, 2 missions flown, approached Hayes in the briefing room. Baker had that look, nervous, eager, wanting guidance from someone who'd survived long enough to know the secrets. "Lieutenant Hayes, sir, I wondered if you had any advice for staying alive up there." Hayes stared at him. Advice? What advice was there? Point your nose at them and shoot? Don't think about the faces? Turn yourself into a machine so you don't have to feel anything? Don't get hit, Hayes said finally. Baker waited for more. Hayes turned away. He had nothing else to say. December 28th. Final mission of the month. Hayes flew with Lieutenant Robert Hastings, the farm boy from Nebraska who'd survived being shot down, spent time as a POW, been repatriated, and returned to flight status. Hastings now had 31 kills. He'd been flying combat for 18 months, 3 weeks until rotation home. During pre-flight, Hastings talked about his girlfriend, Emma, back in Nebraska. Showed Hayes a photograph, pretty girl, blonde hair, standing in front of a white farmhouse. "Going to marry her when I get back," Hastings said. "Take over my father's farm, 300 acres of wheat. No more flying, no more killing, just farming." Hayes said nothing. He was checking his ammunition load, counting rounds, ensuring the guns were properly installed. "You ever think about after?" Hastings asked. "What you'll do when the war ends?" "No." "Come on, Hayes. You must think about it. Don't plan," Hayes said. "Just fly." Hastings laughed. "You're a ray of sunshine, you know that?" "I'm alive," Hayes replied. "That's all that matters." The mission was routine. Ground attack against German supply depot near Koblenz. Hayes destroyed 2 trucks with strafing fire. Hastings got a fuel dump. They turned for home, mission complete, no casualties. The flight back took 40 minutes. Visibility was decent, only light snow, no heavy clouds. Hayes landed first, touching down smoothly on RAF Kings Cliff's runway, taxiing clear. Hastings was right behind him. Hayes climbed out of his cockpit, watching Hastings on final approach. Perfect glide slope, landing gear down, speed good, textbook approach. The flak gun was positioned 300 yards east of the runway. German saboteurs, infiltrators, someone post-war investigation, never determined who had set it up overnight. Single 88mm gun. It had been waiting silently all day. It fired 1 burst, 3 shells. 1 missed. 1 hit the runway, cratering concrete. The third hit Hastings's cockpit at the exact moment his main gear touched down. The P-38 exploded. Not caught fire. Exploded. The fuel tanks detonated simultaneously. The ammunition cooked off, and the entire aircraft became a fireball rolling down the runway at 90 miles per hour. Hayes stood 200 yards away, watching. Fire trucks raced toward the wreckage. Ground crew ran with extinguishers. Everyone knew it was too late. The P-38 burned for 6 minutes before the fire was contained enough to approach. They found Hastings still strapped in his seat. The 88mm shell had killed him instantly. He was already dead when the explosion happened. Small mercy. 31 kills, 3 weeks from going home. Emma's photograph was in his flight suit pocket, charred but recognizable. Hayes watched them pull the body from the wreckage, watched them load it onto a truck, watched them drive toward the morgue. He felt nothing. No horror, no grief, no rage at the randomness. Just the clinical observation that Hastings had survived 18 months of combat, survived being shot down, survived a POW camp, and died landing at his own airfield. The mathematics made no sense. The universe had no justice. Men lived or died based on nothing except where a shell happened to be when they happened to occupy the same space. Hayes walked back to his barracks. His hands didn't shake. His face showed no expression. He'd killed 45 men and watched dozens of friends die, and felt absolutely nothing about any of it. Sergeant DeMarco found him 2 hours later, sitting on his bunk, staring at his hands. "Lieutenant? You okay, sir?" Hayes looked up. "I'm the best killer in the squadron," 45 confirmed. "I'm fine." DeMarco didn't believe him. Nobody believed him. But Hayes kept flying, kept killing, and the numbness continued spreading until there was nothing left except the mechanical process of pointing the nose, squeezing the trigger, and watching the triangle of death speak one more time. 3 weeks later, the war ground on. Hayes flew on, and the faces he couldn't see anymore haunted the sleep he couldn't achieve. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. Lieutenant William Hayes flew his final combat mission over Berlin. The sky was empty. No Luftwaffe fighters rose to meet him. No flak burst around his P-38, just silence and the ruins of a city that had burned for weeks. From 38,000 feet, Berlin looked like a map of hell, collapsed buildings, scorched earth, smoke still rising from sectors that had nothing left to burn. Hayes circled the city once, following protocol, scanning for threats that no longer existed. The Luftwaffe was gone. Fuel depleted, pilots dead, captured or deserted. Aircraft destroyed on the ground by advancing Soviet forces. The war was over. Hayes's final tally: 47 kills. Third highest scoring P-38 pilot in the European theater. Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star. 2 years of combat flying without being shot down. He felt nothing about it. The triangle of death remained silent on the flight back to England. Hayes landed at RAF King's Cliff one last time, shut down the engines, and climbed out of the cockpit. Sergeant DeMarco was waiting with the ground crew, smiling, holding a bottle of champagne someone had been saving for this moment. "We won, Lieutenant. It's over." Hayes nodded, walked past the celebration, went to his barracks, packed his duffel bag, and waited for orders to go home. July 1945, Little Rock, Arkansas. The train arrived at Union Station on a Thursday afternoon. Hayes stepped onto the platform wearing his dress uniform, ribbons on his chest, captain's bars on his shoulders. He'd been promoted in June. His mother and father waited, tears in their eyes. Sarah, his fiancée, stood beside them in a yellow dress. They hugged him. He hugged back. The motions felt mechanical, correct but empty. Little Rock Central High School, where he'd taught physics, organized a parade. Hayes rode in an open car down Main Street while people lined the sidewalks waving flags. A banner read, "Welcome Home Hero." Someone had painted it himself. The letters weren't quite straight. At the ceremony, the mayor gave a speech about sacrifice and duty and the brave men who defended freedom. Hayes stood on the platform, hands at his sides, face neutral. When they called him forward to receive a plaque, he accepted it with a nod and returned to his position. Afterward, people wanted to talk, asked about the war, what it was like to fly, how many Germans he'd shot down. If he was scared, "I was in the service," Hayes said. "I flew fighters." "But how many did you get?" "Some." They wanted stories, adventures, heroism. Hayes had none to give. He'd killed 47 men, using applied physics and concentrated firepower. There was no story there, just mathematics and death. Sarah tried. She planned dinners, invited friends, talked about the wedding they'd postponed since 1943. Hayes agreed to everything, with the same mechanical compliance. Set a date, chose a venue, went through the motions. The wedding was in October. 200 guests. Hayes stood at the altar in his dress uniform and said his vows and kissed his bride and felt nothing except a distant observation that he was performing correctly. November 1945. Hayes Hardware, Main Street, Little Rock. The VA loan came through. Hayes bought a building downtown, filled it with tools and supplies, opened for business. Hammers, nails, paint, lumber, simple things for building instead of destroying. He was good at it. New inventory, understood customers, made decent money. The store succeeded. But at night, he'd wake, reaching for controls that weren't there, hearing the boom chatter of guns that existed only in memory, seeing faces, young faces, falling through frozen air. Sarah slept beside him. Never knew he was awake. Hayes would lie still, staring at darkness, counting. 47 men. 47 fathers, sons, brothers, dead because William Hayes, age 27, former high school physics teacher, had pointed 5 guns at them and understood trajectory better than they did. Elsewhere, the aftermath continued. Cleveland, Ohio. Tommy Morrison returned from POW camp in June, thin, quiet. The Red Cross had informed him of Betty's marriage. He went back to his father's garage on East 185th Street and resumed fixing cars. People asked about the war. Morrison said he'd been captured, spent time in a camp, came home. Never mentioned the 19 kills. Never mentioned the Hitler Youth who'd beaten him to death. That version of events turned out to be wrong. The actual truth was simpler. Wehrmacht had transferred him to Stalag Luft first. He'd survived until liberation, returned home. Betty sent him a letter in 1946, apologizing, explaining, hoping they could be friends. Morrison never responded. He married a woman named Margaret in 1949. They had 2 children. He never flew again, never attended reunions. Died in 1987, age 65, and the obituary mentioned he'd served in the Army Air Forces but didn't specify what he'd done. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Captain Jack Nolan's family received the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at City Hall. His mother accepted it. His father had died in 1943. His younger brother, age 16, stood in uniform. He'd joined the Navy. The medal went in a case in the living room. Visitors would ask about it. Mrs. Nolan would explain that her son had been a fighter pilot, very brave, killed in action over France. She never mentioned the 43 kills. That wasn't how she wanted to remember him. The insurance company, where Nolan had worked, Keystone Mutual, created a scholarship in his name for young men pursuing actuarial careers. It still exists. December 1953. Hayes Hardware, Little Rock. A customer came in looking for drill bits. Hayes helped him find the right size, rang up the purchase. The man noticed the medals in the frame on the wall behind the register. Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star. Air Medal with oak leaf clusters. You serve? The man asked. Yes. What branch? Army Air Forces. What you do? Hayes looked at him. 47 kills. 2 years of killing. The triangle of death speaking in his voice. The faces he couldn't forget and couldn't remember simultaneously. I was a pilot, Hayes said. I flew fighters. See much action. Some. The man waited for more. Hayes said nothing. Eventually the man took his drill bits and left. Hayes stood behind the register, hands resting on the counter. Steady hands, no tremors. The hands of a man who'd turned killing into a science and survived to sell hammers in Arkansas. Sarah was pregnant with their second child. Business was good. Life was fine. The nightmares continued. The war had ended 8 years ago. For William Hayes, it had never stopped. Outside, Main Street bustled with shoppers preparing for Christmas. Inside the hardware store, a 27-year-old veteran stared at nothing and counted rivets that weren't there and wondered if he'd ever stop seeing 17-year-old faces falling through the sky. The triangle of death was silent now, but its echoes remained. 1,953. Little Rock, Arkansas. Sarah found William in the garage behind their house at 2 in the morning. He was sitting on the concrete floor in his pajamas, holding a wrench, crying silently. "William?" She knelt beside him. "What's wrong?" He looked at her. Tears streamed down his face, but he made no sound. Just sat there, wrench in hand, shaking. "Talk to me." "I killed 47 men," he said. His voice was flat despite the tears. 47. I remember some of their faces. Most of them I don't. Does that make it worse? That I can't remember most of them? You were at war. You did what you had to do. I was good at it. Hayes stared at the wrench. That's what's wrong. I was efficient, professional. I turned killing into physics, and I was excellent at it, and I felt nothing. Sarah held him. He didn't resist, but didn't respond. Just sat there until dawn, then got up, showered, dressed, opened his store at 8 a.m. like nothing had happened. She suggested therapy. He refused. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "Just tired." She never found him crying again. But sometimes she'd wake at night and he'd be gone, standing in the backyard, staring at the sky, hands moving as if gripping controls that weren't there. 1,964. Cleveland, Ohio. Tommy Morrison worked as a machinist at Cleveland Pneumatic Tool Company. 43 years old, married to Margaret, 2 children, a boy and a girl. Decent life, quiet life. The letter arrived in May. Reunion invitation. 20th Fighter Group. 20th anniversary of VE Day. Weekend event in Columbus. All former pilots invited. Morrison read it once, put it in the trash, never mentioned it to Margaret. 1,968. Little Rock, Arkansas. The same invitation arrived at Hayes Hardware. Hayes threw it away without opening it. 3 more reunion invitations arrived over the next 20 years. Hayes discarded all of them. He had nothing to say to the men who'd survived. The shared experience created no bond he wanted to acknowledge. They'd all killed together. Why would he want to reminisce about it? 1,972. Geauga County, Ohio. Morrison took his family to an air show. His son, Michael, was 12 and obsessed with airplanes. They walked among the static displays, modern jets, Korean war fighters, preserved World War II aircraft. Morrison saw the P-38 from 100 yards away. Restored, polished, beautiful. The twin booms, the central nacelle, the nose section with its 5 gun ports. He stopped walking. "Dad," Michael pointed. "Look, a P-38 Lightning. Can we see it up close?" Morrison stared at the aircraft. 19 kills, 47 missions. The triangle of death speaking in his voice. The cold at 40,000 feet. Richter's fighter disintegrating. The faces he'd seen in enemy cockpits before firing. "Dad, I'm not feeling well," Morrison said. "Let's go." "But we just got here." "No, they left." Michael complained the entire drive home. Morrison never went to another air show. 1,979. Little Rock. Hayes's hardware store was successful. He'd expanded twice, employed 6 people, served as president of the local Chamber of Commerce, respected businessman, deacon at First Methodist Church, grandfather to 4. His grandson, Thomas, age 8, found the medals in Hayes's study, brought them to Sunday dinner. "Grandpa, what are these?" Hayes looked at the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Air Medal with 11 oak leaf clusters, 47 kills represented by ribbons and metal. "Those are from the war," Sarah said gently. "Your grandfather was a hero. What did you do, Grandpa?" Hayes cut his pot roast, chewed, swallowed. "I was a pilot." "Did you shoot down bad guys?" "I flew fighters." "How many did you get?" Hayes looked at the boy. 8 years old, innocent, wanting stories about heroism and adventure, no understanding of what killing meant, no comprehension of faces falling through frozen air. "Eat your dinner," Hayes said. He never spoke of it again. June 1987. Little Rock. William Hayes collapsed while stocking shelves at his hardware store. Massive heart attack. Dead before the ambulance arrived. Age 67. The obituary in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette mentioned his service in the Army Air Forces, his Distinguished Service Cross, his successful business career, his family. It listed survivors: wife Sarah, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention the 47 kills. Sarah had never told the newspaper. Hayes had never told anyone. 300 people attended the funeral. The VFW conducted military honors. 7 rifle salute. Folded flag. Taps played by a high school student who missed 2 notes but tried his best. They buried Hayes in Oakland Cemetery, section for veterans. His headstone read, "William Hayes, Captain, UCAF, 1,920 to 1,987 beloved husband and father." Nothing about kills, nothing about the war, just dates and a title and relationships. The triangle of death remained unmentioned. 1998. Munich, Germany. A salvage team recovered wreckage from a crash site outside the city. Forensic archaeology project. Locating fallen aircraft, identifying remains, closing historical records. They found Tommy Morrison's P-38 buried in a field near Munich. The one he'd flown his last mission in this contradicted earlier records. Morrison hadn't been shot down in June. His capture happened differently than recorded. The salvage clarified history. The team contacted Morrison in Cleveland, asked if he'd participate in an interview for their documentary. Morrison, age 76, agreed reluctantly. The interviewer asked about the P-38, the missions, what it felt like to fly. "That was someone else," Morrison said. His voice was quiet. "I fixed cars before the war. I fix machines now. The person who flew that plane, I don't know him anymore. But you have memories." "I have memories of being cold, 47 degrees below zero at altitude, my hands numb, the sound of engines. That's all." "And the combat?" Morrison stared at the camera for 10 seconds, then stood up, removed his microphone, and walked out. The interview ended there. 2003, Cleveland. Betty died at age 81. Liver cancer. Her children cleaned out her house, preparing it for sale. In her dresser, beneath folded sweaters, they found a photograph. Young man in Army Air Forces uniform, captain's bars visible. Handsome, serious expression. On the back, in faded ink, Tommy Morrison, 1,944. "Who's this?" her daughter asked. Betty's husband, married to her for 58 years, looked at the photo. "Before my time. Someone she knew before the war, I think. They kept it, put it in a box with other family photographs. The name meant nothing to them. They never knew Tommy Morrison had 19 kills, 47 missions, survived a POW camp. Never knew their mother had been engaged to him before he deployed. Never knew she'd kept his photograph for 59 years. 2007. Cleveland. Tommy Morrison died at age 85. Heart failure. His wife Margaret had died 2 years earlier. His children found him in his apartment. He'd been living alone since her death, sitting in his chair, television on, peacefully gone. The obituary mentioned his service, mentioned his work at Cleveland Pneumatic, his family, his quiet life. It didn't mention the 19 kills. His son Michael, cleaning out the apartment, found a box in the closet. Inside, his father's flight logs, faded photographs of P-38 seconds, a list of mission dates written in careful handwriting, and a small notebook. Michael opened the notebook. Each page had a date and a number. June 1944. Various entries. The last entry. 47th mission. 19 total. Michael never understood what the numbers meant. He threw the notebook away. 2019. Phoenix, Arizona. The last surviving P-38 pilot from the 20th Fighter Group died at age 97. Lieutenant David Chen, who joined the squadron in 1945, flew 3 missions before the war ended. His children said that even at 97, he'd wake at night, moving his hands like he was holding a control stick, calling out altitudes, scanning for threats that existed only in memory. The cold, he'd say when they asked what he was dreaming about. It was so cold up there, 47 below. Your breath froze, your hands went numb, and you flew anyway. He was the last voice that remembered. When he died, the triangle of death finally fell silent. Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, Washington, D.C., present day. The P-38J Lightning hangs suspended from the ceiling in the World War II Aviation Gallery, restored to pristine condition. Polished aluminum skin gleaming under museum lights, twin booms extending backward. Central nacelle suspended between them. Nose section with 5 gun ports, 4, 50 caliber, 120 millimeters, pointing at nothing. Beautiful. The placard beneath reads, Lockheed P-38J Lightning, Fork-tailed Devil. Specifications. Crew, 1. Length, 37 feet 10 inches. Wingspan, 52 feet. Max speed, 414 miles per hour. Range, 1,300 miles. Armament, 4 times. 50 calories. M2 Browning machine guns. 1 times 20 millimeters Hispano cannon. Service history. The P-38 served as a long-range escort fighter in both European and Pacific theaters. P-38 pilots achieved remarkable success, with the type recording some of the highest kill ratios of the war. Notable for its twin-engine configuration and concentrated nose armament, the Lightning proved especially effective at high altitude. The placard doesn't mention the triangle of death. The curators considered it, but decided the phrase was too dramatic, too theatrical, not appropriate for scholarly presentation. Tourists photograph the aircraft. Children point at the twin booms, asking parents why it looks different from other planes. A school group passes through, teacher explaining how the P-38 protected bombers. Nobody understands what it meant to fly it. To sit in that exposed cockpit at 40,000 feet, where the temperature dropped to 47 below zero. To point those 5 guns at another human being and squeeze the trigger. To watch the triangle of death speak, and men fall and feel nothing because feeling anything would break you. A museum docent approaches a visitor with questions. The P-38 was one of the most successful long-range escort fighters of World War II, she explains. Its twin-engine design provided redundancy, and the concentrated nose armament eliminated convergence issues present in other fighters. Technical, accurate, bloodless. The visitor nods, takes a photo, moves on to the next exhibit. The P-38 hangs silent. Its engines will never run again. Its guns will never fire. It has become art beautiful, historical, divorced from the violence it was built to deliver. National Archives, College Park, Maryland. Storage Facility 7. In Climate-Controlled Room 447, Archival Box 8847P contains fragments recovered from Tommy Morrison's P-38. The salvage team from Munich sent everything here in 1998. Corroded metal pieces, sections of aluminum skin, burned and twisted, part of a control column, shattered instrument glass, an oxygen regulator, frozen in the position Morrison last set it. His ID tags rest in a small plastic envelope. The metal is pitted, corroded, but the stamping is still legible. Morrison, Thomas J. O. 795324, Apos Catholic. Beside the tags, another envelope contains a photograph. Woman in a dress, standing in front of a house. On the back, in ink faded to brown, Betty, Cleveland, 1943. She'd been dead 16 years when the salvage team found this photograph in Morrison's crashed P-38. She'd kept his picture for 59 years. He'd kept hers forever, or at least until the fire and the crash consumed everything. A researcher requests the box once every 3 years, on average. Studies the fragments, takes notes, publishes papers about material stress and crash dynamics and historical aircraft construction. Nobody asks about the 19 kills. Nobody asks what it felt like. Nobody asks if Morrison's hands shook after he landed or if he ever stopped seeing faces. The box goes back on the shelf. Rhine Valley, Germany, present day. The sky over the Rhine, at 40,000 feet, is empty. Commercial jets pass through Lufthansa, United, Air France, pressurized cabins maintaining 70 degrees, while outside the temperature is 47 below zero. Same as 1944. The cold hasn't changed, only what happens in it has changed. Passengers watch movies on seatback screens. Flight attendants serve drinks. Nobody looks out the window at the altitude where men once killed each other with mechanical precision. The villages below have been rebuilt. The cities restored. The fields where P-38 seconds and W-190 seconds fell are now farmland, highways, industrial parks. Nature and civilization have covered the scars, but the altitude remains. 40,000 feet, 47 below. The same geometric space where the triangle of death once spoke in American voices and German pilots died confused. Now it's just empty air, cold and thin and peaceful. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. EAA Air Venture, present day. A restored P-38 performs at the air show. Privately owned, maintained by volunteers. Flown by a retired airline pilot who never saw combat. The twin Allison engines roar. The aircraft banks, climbs, dives in graceful arcs. The crowd applauds. An elderly man watches from the flight line, 96 years old, wheelchair-bound, oxygen tank beside him. His daughter stands behind the wheelchair, watching him watch the P-38. The old man's hands move unconsciously, left hand adjusting position throttles, right hand pulling back control column, thumb extending trigger. The motions are automatic. Muscle memory from 75 years ago asserting itself despite age and disability. A young man, maybe 20, approaches. He's wearing a vintage flight jacket, trying to look authentic. "Excuse me, sir. Did you fly in the war?" The old man doesn't look away from the P-38. His hands continue their phantom movements. "Long time ago," he says. His voice is thin, damaged by age and oxygen deprivation. "What was it like?" The old man watches the P-38 complete a barrel roll, watches it climb toward 40,000 feet, where the air is thin and cold and deadly. "It was cold," he says, 47 below at altitude. Your breath froze. Your hands went numb inside heated gloves. You flew anyway. Did you shoot anyone down? The old man's hands stop moving. His daughter touches his shoulder gently, a warning. He's told her he doesn't talk about this. Never has. Never will. "I flew," he says finally. "That's all." The young man waits for more. There is no more. Eventually he thanks the old man and walks away. The P-38 descends, lands, taxis, back to parking. The crowd disperses. The old man sits in his wheelchair, staring at the silent aircraft. His daughter leans down. "You okay, Dad?" "I'm fine," he says. The same thing William Hayes said, the same thing they all said when they weren't fine at all. She wheels him away. He looks back once, at the P-38 gleaming, restored, beautiful, a work of art now, a historical curiosity, not a weapon, not a killer. The triangle of death sleeps. The sound of silence. At 40,000 feet over the Rhine Valley, the temperature is 47 degrees below zero. Commercial jets pass through with their pressurized cabins and sleeping passengers. No one fires guns. No one dies. The twin Allison engines exist only in museums and air shows now, their roar reduced to recorded sound and distant memory. The triangle of death 4. 50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon, clustered within 2 feet, firing along the same trajectory, is silent. The men who made it speak are gone. Morrison, Nolan, Hayes, Hastings, Roland, all the others, dead or dying or so old they can't remember why it mattered. The last voices have faded. The cold remains. 47 below, unchanging. But now it's just cold. Not death, just physics and altitude, and empty air, where ghosts used to fight. The triangle sleeps. The war is over. The killing is finished. And the sky over Europe is finally, completely, permanently silent.